Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.
Welcome to Prairie Mosaic, a patchwork of stories about the arts, culture, and history in our region.
Hi, I'm Barb Gravel.
And I'm Bob Danback. On this edition, we'll meet a metal artist from Fergus Falls, travel east to a museum that sparked the Industrial Revolution, and listen to poetry with a musical flair.
She pedals effortlessly, a smile as broad.
At 10 feet high and comprised of roughly 2,000 papier-mâché bricks, the Spirit Wall is a collaborative art project between North Dakota artist Terry Jelsing and the members of the Spirit Lake Nation at Fort Totten. Within each brick of the wall are the hopes, dreams, memories, songs, and drawings of the people who created them.
When I've got colored paper, I can kind of drape it over the sides like that. I add a little bit more, and I start to fill up the mold. Do it.
We already got 3.
Go ahead. Tip it upside down, lift up, pinch it, drop it. Very good. I think the connection between art and life for people on the reservation is less distinguishable than it is maybe for the white cultures that surround it. We often think of art as a commodity, and I think that from ancient times forward, people in indigenous communities have thought about art simply as an exercise in everyday life. The North Dakota Museum of Art received a grant to host a collaboration project between people of the Spirit Lake Nation and at least 6 artists. I was fortunate to be one of them. And so the wall itself is like the community, but the brick is like the individual, like all of you are individuals. So when you take all of these bricks, which are like all of you, and you put them in a wall, it's a pretty strong wall, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
When I started to think about the reservation and what the reservation meant, I thought of the wall as a metaphor that really sums up for me the idea of how we perceive the reservation. We perceiving meaning the culture that is not a part of that. And so I wanted to get on the inside and find a way or a process in which the people of Spirit Lake could show some of their work as being part of that. The Spirit bricks are bricks that was an increment that many people could make. I encourage them to write prayers, stories, names of people, memories of people, draw pictures from the very young to the very old, and they would tear this paper up and put it into the paper vats that I had before the bricks were actually cast. I think for folks who have participated in the project to see their bricks become part of a stronger whole is something that I wanted to accomplish as an artist. And so my part in it is really an arranger, a designer of processes, a way of bringing people together. When I think about the bricks themselves, we're looking at right around 2,000 efforts, 2,000 people being involved in what this is about. Brick making's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. All of these bricks are made of different things. There's lawnmower grass mixed in with them. Those are the kind of the browner ones because they're organic surfaces. There's papers that were generated on the reservation. I think every secretary between Rugby and Devil's Lake's been saving paper for me for over a year. There's deer hair in them. There's probably some blood in them from hunting season. So all of these bricks get ritualized with the time of our life. Even though I'm using non-traditional materials, it does sort of work like traditional bricklaying materials. This is what a bricklayer would probably call backfilling. This stuff sets up fairly quickly, so I don't have a whole lot of time to deal with it. So I've pre-planned where the bricks are going to go. And the first thing I do is just simply lay them up and get the surface kind of connected on all sides. Because they're relatively the same width, they're not always the same height, and so the kind of odd shape, it's kind of responding to each one separately as you're putting them together because they're different. Okay, once I have that part of it done, I have to shim these because if you notice, they all tend to fall down. And I'm simply using just different pieces of foam core, different types of foam core paper, and I'll get these up to a certain level. The material is relatively strong. When these bricks dry completely, they're almost like solid pieces of plywood. And so if you think of the weight of this as being, you know, the end grain of telephone books piled up on top of another, you can imagine how heavy these sections are. Probably 75% of the bricks have been made by people on the Spirit Lake Nation. So the idea of collaboration is to extend out as far into the community as possible and try to get as many people to participate. I taught at Rugby High School for several years. The welding instructor, Bruce Ganarelli, has been doing some wonderful things with kids there, and wanted to give them a chance to be collaborators too.
What we designed is a bracket system to go on each side of the wall and then bolt all the way through it. It's good that kids get to do these different types of projects, but also a project like this that reaches out beyond the community and into the state.
The North Dakota Museum of Art has been a great leader in the state of North Dakota and has certainly promoted projects like this that create opportunities in rural areas. And I think the benefit is yet to be realized in terms of how social art projects can affect the culture of North Dakota as well as what we think about art in our lives as individuals.
Sculptor Jeffrey Zachman gained national recognition when he transformed the path of his artistic career from functional potter to metal and motion.
I love to watch people so much that I think this is just bait. This is just my way of getting people in to look at them. I'm very interested in different perspectives and what makes people tick. And this kind of goes with that in a way. At an art show, people reveal an awful lot about themselves just by watching a sculpture and how they interact with people around them. I started my art career, I was a functional potter for 15 years. It was probably a very good place for me to start because I learned the ropes on selling artwork, how to approach the public, what shows to do, where to go with that, how to enter into art shows. All along I'd been making these kinetic sculptures and I just kind of made them for myself. I didn't think anybody else would like them. I thought it was my weird quirk because I hadn't seen anything like it. My wife, on the other hand, is saying, Jeff, you should do a show with these. And I was like, oh, geez, no one's going to buy them. And I'm going to be humiliated. They're just going to point and laugh at me. You know, they're not going to pay what I have to ask for them. And she just kept on it. After a while, I said, okay, I'm going to apply to some art shows. The first one I did was right here in Fergus Falls. It was fun to do, didn't sell anything, but people would just crowd around and watch them. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And then the second one was a small organization in Minneapolis. I sold some pieces. It was just amazing. And then the third one was at the Smithsonian. I did the Smithsonian Craft Show, which was like a career high point. People pay a lot of money to come to the show. So at that time I had a lot of little tiny pieces as well as some of my larger stuff. And I thought, oh, they're not going to want to look at the little stuff because little stuff was hand done and stuff. So I put those all down on the floor. And then up on the tables I put my bigger pieces. And these guys came in their very expensive Italian suits on their knees playing with these sculptures. Totally blew me away. Some of our most valuable tools look like junk to anybody else. And we talk about when we die and they have that big auction, all our really valuable tools just be in the dollar box. This is one of those tools. It's thing I use for making spirals, kind of a tornado type shape that is in a lot of my work. And the ball comes in kind of slow and then it speeds up as it drops down, so it adds a lot of action. People tend to like that kind of stuff. I just love that little detail. Things have just taken off. Within 6 months of doing my first show, I didn't have time to do any more art shows with the pottery at all, and I haven't looked back. The inspiration for my artwork starts when I was about 8 years old. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I had a friend who had an Amish toy that you put a marble in one side and it would go down one side and drop down and then go back and drop down. And that's all it did. And that friend and I played with that for a long time. And then where I grew up, when they were building like crazy in the 50s, they dug the basements, and then for some reason nothing happened for about 2 years. And they had these huge piles of dirt. And I and my friends and my sisters would go out and I'd have a handful of marbles and I would make trails and tunnels for marbles. And that's how this all started. And then when I went to college studying ceramics, I started making slab pots with holes and channels that marbles would go through. People were quite interested in it, and it was fun for me to do. Clay didn't work very well. It shrinks and it warps. It took me a while to realize, that I needed to work in something other than clay, just because I was a potter, and it was kind of one of those slap in the forehead moments of what am I working in clay for? And then everything kind of came together. And a lot of this is done just by eye. I've done enough of them now that I kind of get a feeling on how things are going, but at the same time I get surprised. And if you're in my studio, there are balls laying all over the place. The jump is one of the things that people are always mystified. How do you figure that out? And the way that I tell them is you can take the slope that it's got with the speed of the ball, so you're taking the velocity of the ball and the distance, and you can calculate that out and see where it lands. Or you can take the track, make the swoop, and wherever it lands, weld the baskets. That's what I do. See, that cleared better. People are drawn to motion. And I think it's actually something that's probably buried very deep in our primitive selves, that we're attuned to motion. In our primitive caveman self, probably whatever was moving was either lunch or a threat. So we pay attention to that. When you're sitting at an art show, the chairs we sit at are fairly high, so we're at eye level with people. And it's really fun because I'm sitting there in this chair and people are walking by, and all of a sudden you can see a head and come right into my booth. It's like, whoa. It's like, I always think of it like a gopher. Just, what the heck is that? And it just draws them in. And it's just the motion, that people are just drawn to motion for some reason.
Bob, as we travel across North America gathering materials for our documentaries, we often come across special places that we'd like to share with you.
And Barb, one such place was Lowell, Massachusetts, where the Industrial Revolution comes alive.
Lowell is one of the most important cities in the American Industrial Revolution. It's really the first large-scale industrial city built solely for the purpose of producing cloth and producing profit for the mill owners. Here they were able to bring together capital, nature in the form of the river, to create a power system, and also bring in a new kind of labor system to create this first large-scale city. Lowell became a model for other industrial cities, and throughout the 19th century, places like Lawrence and Manchester, up and down the Merrimack River Valley, and then ultimately all across New England and up and down the eastern seaboard would model themselves after Lowell. So this is really where industrial America begins. The whole reason that Lowell is here is the water power system. The Merrimack River, in the space of about 1.5 miles, drops 32 feet. And that drop is what powers these mills. And the mills would be sited right alongside. So the water would flow in, flow underneath the basements of those mills, drop down through big tunnels called penstocks, flow through the penstock, drop down about 15 feet onto a water wheel, spin the water wheel, spin pulleys, leather belts, and ultimately run whole rooms, whole floors, and whole mills filled with machinery. Originally, as they're building Lowell, there aren't any workers around. This is really farm country. In Lowell in 1820, about 200 people lived in what today is a city of 106,000 people. Not a lot of a labor force to draw on. And so the mill owners were forced to send recruiters out into the countryside, and they recruited the children of farmers out there. At the time, farms weren't doing very well, and many of the large farm families were looking for things for their children to do, and particularly their daughters. If you were a woman on the frontier in New England, very few opportunities open to you. Maybe you could work as a domestic servant, maybe as a schoolmistress, but that's about it. So this is a great opportunity for women to come and work for the first time. And they would come by the thousands, even the tens of thousands in the 1830s and the 1840s. And first, because this was farm country, not very many places for them to live, so the companies built boarding houses specifically to house these mill girls that would come down to work in the mills. People imagine kind of tenement-style dwellings and pretty cramped. Well, you'll see it's a bit nicer than that. Certainly was a little bit cramped. 30 or 40 girls would be living in a fairly small boarding house unit, but you'll see there's parlor space that served as a kind of living room, but also a dining room space, the place where the girls would play musical instruments. There's a piano there. Upstairs in the boarding house, you'll see a bedroom, and in each one there would be 2 beds, 2 girls to a bed, so pretty close living up there. Further up in the attic, any sort of leftover girls that didn't fit in a bedroom would be living more or less dormitory style. You're living with 30 or 40 other girls in pretty close proximity. But there are benefits to that too. If you lived on the farm, maybe you wouldn't see anybody else your own age for weeks at a time or months at a time. Here you have the camaraderie of sort of like going to college and living in the dorms. You form some relationships that are really important to you throughout your life. But there were problems with it. It comes with some very difficult and challenging working conditions. This is pretty tough labor for 11, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week in a hot, sweaty, humid environment filled with cotton lint. And some of the mill girls began to think about, well, might we ask for more wages, better working conditions, and they get together to form some of the first labor unions in the country. The Female Labor Reform Association was formed here in Lowell in the 1830s, and they begin to stage walkouts, stage strikes. But by about the 1850s, the mill girls are deciding that this isn't the experience that they wanted, and they begin to head back home. The mill owners need to fill in, and they turn to the Irish laborers that had been here all along, working, digging the canals, building the mill systems, and begin to bring in the Irish into the mills. And that's really the first wave of immigrants you see working here. And then throughout the 19th century, there will be waves of immigrants that come to Lowell from really around the world and end up working in the mills. And you see a shift in the labor force from being really 80%, 90% women in the 1820s, 1830s. As more of the immigrant groups begin to flow in, there's much more of a mix. And you see men doing jobs that maybe women had done before. Men had always been part of the factory process, doing some of the work like working with the carding machines. And they'd always worked as overseers and as mechanics. But now increasingly throughout the 19th century, they've become machine operators as well. And by the end of the 19th century, you see about an even mix of men and women working on the floor of each one of these factories. By the end of the 19th century, Lowell is really changing and using far more steam power than hydropower. About 1881 or so, it's about half and half, and then it tips the balance the other way in the last couple of decades of the 19th century. Now that steam power is interesting because it really puts Lowell out of business. You don't need to place it along a waterway. You don't need the drop in the water. And that's what Lowell's unique competitive advantage was. Well, once you can put a steam engine in there and do it efficiently and do it fairly cheaply, well, now you can put a factory anywhere you want. So by the 1880s, places like Fall River are far larger textile cities than Lowell ever was. What Lowell's model had created had now just put it out of business.
The duo, calling themselves Lines and Notes, is made up of Terry Mano and Kevin Zepper. Their original music and poetry creates a mood and tone for the audience to interpret. Enjoy the eclectic lines and notes.
Out of bed and chicken skin feet hit freezing wooden floor. I'm half awake and sleepy seeds still cling to the corners of stony, dreamy eyes. I'm running slow-mo on a go-go cold Minnesota November morning, focusing with chilly will on the coffee cooker to pour out from a pouting spout. A mean, slow stream of steaming Java. Shiver and strut, peel off paisley pajamas and jump into the cup. Sproing off the breadboard, diving board, feet together, palms lock in overhead, and kerploosh, a 9.5 Olympic swan dive into the mug. I swim and swoosh around the inside hemisphere of the mug, dive under the hot murky brown and feel stinging caffeine peeling eyelids. Awake! I poodle paddle across the ripples, crossing back and forth from one lip of the cup to the other. Australian crawl, climb up curving handle, and cannonball. Throw sienna over scalp, splash and spit like a greasy, grinning gray goose. Just plain rolling it till half the Java's all over the kitchen floor. Towel off with a big paper coffee filter. Drain the cup in 2 guiltless gulps. She floats through the universe coffee hut and orders a tall, dark cup of twilight. A Mercury comet carries her to the beach by the bay. She spreads her shawl on the ground where grass and sand blur. It's early morning, her favorite time, when the fiery yellow sun and shy, coy moon exchange glances in the pale iris sky. She sips the spangled twilight slow, pausing when she's connecting with something, as she does in the morning. The ocean air, rolling in from a point where the only land is underneath deep water, cools her face, dissipates the remaining steam from her open cup, fluttering breath from a blue mother. For her, all of the elements in her life melt like a sandcastle. Magic surrounds her. She warms her hands in the wax cup, feels the honeycomb dimples on the amber wrap holder, savoring each swallow down to the bitter brown. In this moment, the sky clock winds down and balance regenerates. After she empties her cup, she gazes into the bottom. Tiny stars shimmer among earthy dregs. On 20th, the high school boys track team runs on the sidewalk, tanned and muscled like a squad of Adonai. Their determination rolls off stoic brows. 10 miles, that's all. In close pursuit is the girl on the bike. She follows a few yards behind these gazelle. She pedals effortlessly, a smile as broad as the brim on her straw garden hat. The girl grins for sunshine, for summer, for bicycles, for following the high school boys track team. Before my eyes, the bike becomes a white stallion, and the girl wears a hunter's tunic with bow and arrow slung over her marble left arm. Hunting these, the easy prey, they will wear down. They run in straight lines in the flats. No water, they'll need to stop and rest in the shade. She will ride up and dismount. They cannot run. She pulls back the gut of the bow, piercing their glistening skin with her eyes.
If you know of an artist, a topic, or an organization in our region that you think might make for an interesting segment, please contact us at prairiemosaic@prairiepublic.org. I'm Bob Dambach.
And I'm Barb Gravel. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Prairie Mosaic.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. The North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.